Hey guys, and welcome to the channel. In today's topic, we are going to be going through creating a Windows 10 reference image. Now, this reference image is going to be deployed using MDT. Now, we're going to be using the latest version at the time of recording, which is March 2018, which is 8450. Now, this version of MDT makes it compliant with Windows 10 1709. Now this is a sort of a quick and dirty video on creating a reference image because there's a lot of processes involved in trying to get this automated and doing things in the background. Personally, I don't see the point because you only ever create a reference image once every 6 months. So really, is there any point in putting all the time and effort in trying to get it to work automated when it's something that you do on an ad hoc basis? So I'm just going to show you how to do it quickly. So what we need to do first of all is load up the MDT toolbench. Make sure you've got the ADK 1709 kit installed as well. And make sure that you've got a share created. If you haven't, just right click on here and then say new deployment share, and then this will go through and create you this. So what we're going to do is basically we're going to import the operating system to start with. So make sure you've got a Windows 10 ISO available to you. Mount it. Get the drive number, wherever it's put it. So these are the setup files for the OS. And what we need to do is if you right click on that and say import, and then we say full set of source files. So hit next. Put the drive in. And hit next. And then that will copy all of the files into MDT for you to use. Now this doesn't take too long. So once that's done, hit finish, and then that will bring the OS into view. Now obviously here we can install applications, we can import drivers and so on. Now with the reference image you don't want any drivers, and the applications you can install manually when we go through the task sequence. Now if you have the uninstalled files for applications like Office and so forth, you can add it here and then it will install it as part of the sequence. But I mean the only things that I ever install in a reference image really is the Visual C++ redistributables as well as Office 16, and that is all I put in because that's what you need for the reference. And you need the OS fully patched, which is the reason why we're doing it in the first place, and you also need Office 16 patched as well. So under the task sequence, say new task sequence, give it an ID, so we'll call it W10, and we'll just call this capture Windows 10, and then hit next. It's a standard client task sequence. Now you've got plenty to choose from here. So if you was doing a server, you would select standard server, but because we're doing Windows 10, we're going to use standard client task sequence. So hit next. We want to select the operating system that we're going to use, so we're going to use the Enterprise Edition. Hit next. We do not specify a product key at this stage. Product key goes in when you actually deploy the machine, not when you're creating the reference image. So hit next. Give it a company, so we'll just call it Windows Company. Do not set a password. So this means that when you're doing the actual deployment, it's not going to ask you for a password, it'll just actually just log itself in. So hit next. Next. And that'll create the sequence. Now there's a few things that we need to do to the sequence before you can run it. So if you right click on it and go to properties, and then go to task sequence, there's a few things here that we need to look at. So inside state restore, Windows Update will always be disabled. Well, obviously we want Windows Update to run. Now you can either enable it here, or you can run Windows Update yourself. Doesn't really matter. The next thing we need to do is pause the task sequence. So what this will do is it'll go through, it'll update, patch everything, install any applications that you've specified, and then it'll hold. So that gives you your opportunity to actually come into the OS, install any custom apps that you want to do, which are too hard to do in an automated fashion or a silent fashion. It allows you to check over the build before the initial sysprep and capture back. So what we do is we go to General and say New Command Line. We'll just call this Pause Sequence. Now the command line you're looking for is sysprep.exe %script root %lti suspend.wsf, and what that'll do is it'll put an icon on the desktop so you can do what you like. You can reboot, and then when you actually double click on the icon to resume, it will then continue the sequence. So that is essential if you want to hold it. So if there's any roles that you want to install automated as well, what we can do is we can install this just before here. So we'll install it just before the Windows update. So we can go to Add, Roles, Install Roles and Features. Now make sure Windows 10 is selected here, and you might want to put in .NET 3 and .NET 4.6 and go through. If there's any other options that you want, then select them here. And to be honest, I don't really put too much in because I like to keep the reference image down, keep it clean, and then it allows you to do any customizations that you want once it's deployed. The one thing I do install for my clients is Telnet. I just give them a Telnet client because it's not included as default, and then I hit apply. You can give it a friend name if you like, and then hit OK. And that's it from the sequence point of view. Now the next thing you need to do, I don't know if you've used MDT before, but you need to be able to create a boot file. And the way that's done is if you go to properties on here and then go to Windows PE, here's all the settings for the ISO file that you're going to boot from. Now this needs to be created if you've never done it before, and what it'll do is it'll create one for an x86 as well as 64-bit. So make sure if you're making any changes to it, make sure that the platform up here is changed. So once you've made your changes, if you right click on it and then say update deployment share, that will then go ahead and actually create those files for you. Now once that's done, go over to your Hyper-V box, create a brand new virtual machine. So this is the actual reference image machine, so we'll just call this reference. Always make sure it's a G1. Do not use G2, and the reason for that is it uses SCSI boot drivers, and for the reference image you don't want the SCSI stuff in there, especially for Windows 10. So always use a G1. So hit next, specify the memory. So to be honest, it can be quite low. I'm going to set it at 8 gig, but you can set it at 4 gig. I'm just doing this purely for speed to make sure it's actually got the resources it wants to go through and build quickly. Connected to the network, specify a small drive. So more than likely 64 gig. If you're literally just doing the OS and nothing else, do 48. And even that, to be honest, is an overkill, but hey ho. Hit next. Now what we need to do is we need to boot from the files that you generated. Now I've already copied them across, but if you need to copy them, browse to your MDT server, look inside the deployment share, and then inside the folder called boot. And that's the file you're after there, disk image file. So copy that over to your Hyper-V box and then boot from it. Hit next and then hit finish. Now next thing you do is you right click on it and go to settings. What we're going to do is increase the processors up a bit because it only defaults to 1. If you've got plenty of time and you don't need it done quickly, then you can stick to 1. But really 2 you should configure. I'm going to configure 4 just for the purposes of getting the video done quickly. And that is it. So let's boot this baby up. So hit right start and then connect to it. Hit run. See, these are some of the things that you can go through and configure an MDT to remove. And really, it's just not worth the effort. So now it's presently logging into the MDT server, but because I haven't specified the settings for logon, it's going to prompt me in a second. Okay, so once it prompts you, put in the details to connect to the MDT server. So in my case, it's just default, so administrator account, and it's still on a work group at the moment because my MDT is not domain joined. But if it was, you'd put your domain in here. And here, this is the sequence that we created, capture Windows 10. So we'll select that, hit next. Keep the name as default. If you are on a domain or not, never ever put it on the domain. Reference images always stay on workgroup. And this is what I was saying about going through and already predefining these settings in a text file. Now I can include the text file in MDT to actually already answer these questions, but really, I mean, just for a matter of just saying next, 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 just for a quick deployment, you don't need to. Now we're already installing as roles and features, so we don't need to worry about that. Now we are capturing the image, and it will capture it back to MDT and give it a file name. If you want to capture somewhere else, then that is where you would put the share. Hit next and then hit begin. And that is it. Let it do its business. So now what it's going to do is it's going to go through the task sequence that we had. It's going to format the drives, copy the OS to the reference VM. Once it's done that, it's going to boot up and then go through and then follow the sequence that we were editing. So in our case, it's going to install .NET 3.5 and the telnet rule, and then start a Windows update. This whole process can take around 20 minutes, half an hour. It all depends upon the speed of your machine. Now I'm running this on an SSD. I've got a couple of SSDs in here, so it's not too bad on the performance, but I would say typically expect around half an hour. Plus you have your download times on your updates and then the reboot to actually apply those updates. Once that's done, we have a couple of things that we need to remove, because as of time of recording, which is March 18, There's a couple of options and features that Microsoft are adding in, which is mainly the Eclipse Manager, and more recently they've added the network speed app. These need to be removed, primarily because sysprep seems to fail if it can't seem to remove these apps or customize these apps and clean them out as part of the sysprep process. So that element will actually break. If you don't apply any Windows updates and just go through, basically build it from an RTM and then capture it straight back, you don't need to remove them because they're not installed. So the RTM Windows 10 that is presently available, which is from around September 17, doesn't have these parts in it, or these applications in it. So you can literally just capture it and then capture it back to create your WIM file. But if Windows Update is allowed to run, then Eclipse Manager and Network Speed are then added as, quote, Windows 10 features, and they will then break the capturing process. So we'll let this run through and we'll come back when it's done. There we go, we're actually going in for our first reboot now. So here we can see it's actually installing our .NET process. So what you might want to do is just bring, if you're actually watching it, bring your task manager. We go to more details. You can actually see what it's doing. See, that's it, it's done .NET, and now it's moving on to its Windows updates. So what it'll do now is go through, work out what it needs to do, download them, and then install them for you. So we'll come back when this is done. So you'll get this little message here saying the task sequence has been suspended. Now you can do anything you like, you can reboot it, you can add your stuff. Now what we're going to do is we're going to remove these troublesome packages. So we're going to bring up PowerShell, run that as an administrator. And the command you want to put in is getappxpackage, and you want to basically search for anything with Eclipse in it, so Eclipse star, and then you need a pipe, and then just say remove app.x package. Did I spell it right now? And that's it. And the other one is network speed. And you can remove anything else as well, like Bing Sports. What I've got is a link in the description where you can actually just run this whole thing and remove tons of stuff out. So once you've finished cleaning up, and that's all done, what I would suggest is that you take a snapshot, because if say you do this down the line and Microsoft adding a new app which then breaks it, you'll have to diagnose it and you'll have to run the whole thing again. So if you just run a checkpoint and say pre-sysprep, if it does break, at least you can go back, make the change, document your change, and then potentially go through it all again, or just recover and sysprep back. So let's go for it and see what happens. So it's continuing with the sequence. It applies Windows PE, so that it's got something to boot back from when it does a reboot. And then hopefully it should do a sysprep, which basically cleans down the image, makes sure that there's nothing in there. There we go. And failed. It wasn't what I was expecting to see, but it's good for the video because we can actually go through and have a look to see why it failed. So the location of the logs to diagnose what went wrong is in C Windows, System 32, sysprep, go into Panther, and then go into setup act.log. And then we need to read through this to find out why. Right, so what we're seeing here is basically it's saying package Adobe Systems Photoshop Express was installed, failed to remove app. So that's what's caused it to stop this time round. You see there, this package will not function properly in the sysprep image. So that is why it's failed. So what we will do is we will revert back. See, this is all good. Wasn't expecting it, but it's good. So it means we need to remove Photoshop. So let's boot back up. Let's bring up the PowerShell. Now I don't know what the Photoshop app is actually called. I mean, I could probably guess. But what we can do is we can just run. Whoa. Hang on. Format that as a table. That's better. Right, so we need to find Photoshop. Actually, what we can do. See if we can do this. Adobe. There you go. So that's what we need to remove. So let's take our previous command. So and let's pipe that to remove. Oops, double pipe. Remove appxpackage. Okay, that's gone. Checkpoint. Capture 2. So let's have another go. Yes. Right, resume. So let's go into PowerShell. And what we need to do is actually remove that application. So if we say getappxpackage, I can't spell getapppackage. We say a D, and then pipe that to a table. We say O. There you go. So what we'll do is we'll remove that one. There's quite a few that do break it, but what you can do is if you just say getapppackage, pipe it to a table, you'll be able to see everything that's installed. So like Xbox app, desktop app installer, print 3D, remote desktop. Some of these can't be removed. Zoom music. You don't need these in a reference image. And what you could do is if you wanted to remove them all, is you could just say remove package and then just say remove appxpackage. Some of them are not removable, which is why it's causing some errors. But it will go through and remove everything from the image. Now, as we go to the start menu, you'll find things start disappearing. So we'll let that go through. So there you see like Bing News, Office Way, Print 3D, Xbox, sticky notes. But you might want sticky notes. You might want calculator. So you can either remove everything and then re-add back in what you want, or sit and go through and remove individual apps and then just script it and copy and paste it in. So now when we say get, we've only got the stuff that cannot be removed. Like that. Probably worth giving it a bounce. After all, that's been ripped out. As you can see, there's nothing left. It's all gone. Which is good. So, hopefully, when we click on resume, you might want to take another snapshot, but when you hit resume, it should execute a sysprep and then capture it back to the MDT server. And there we go, sysprep is successfully running. So what it's doing now is it's cleaning all of the customizations, anything that we've done to the image, it's ripping it all out, which then allows you to basically boot the VM into a, like a clean environment. So it doesn't take too long to run. And then what will happen is it will reboot and it will boot back into Windows PE, and then it will start the capture back to the MDT server. So we're booting back into PE. It will rerun as task sequence and then create the WIM. Now, what we can do is we can pop back to our MDT server and browse the share that we're writing to. As you can see there, that's the file it's creating, and it should start creating in a second. So that's started to capture back now. So if we flick back, there you go, that file's growing. So it is capturing okay. So we'll let that whiz through and then we'll come back and then I'll show you what to do with the image once we've finished. And there we go, our deployment has finished. So what we can do now is we can actually just turn this VM off. And as you can see there, it's 6.5 gig. Now, what we need to do now is go back into your workbench, and under operating systems, we'll create a new folder. We'll call it Windows 10. And then if you right click and then import, this time we are importing a custom image file. So we want to browse, point to the file you've just created. Your best bet is to move it because you don't really need a copy of it again inside the capture folder. So just move it. Keep the folder name short, so we'll call this Windows 10 x64 1709. And there it is, our fully customized image. So if you're using MDT as your deployment method, then you would create a task sequence in here to then deploy the image. If you're using SCCM, then you would copy that over to your SCCM server and then deploy it on there. I have videos showing how to do that, so you can have a look through my channel. But as we're using MDT, I'll just show you how to do it on here. So we just go new task sequence. We'll call this W10 x64, and we'll call this deploy, spelled correctly, deploy Windows 10 x64 1709. So remember, this is the one that you're actually deploying. So we'll use the same thing again, standard task sequence. We will deploy the image that we created, none of these, because these are the RTMs. You would specify a key, so you need to put your own key in there. I'm not, just for the purposes of the video. Set the true organization, the true username, so IT department, and set a home page. As an example, you would set your password. Let it create. And then exactly the same process as before. So go into your hypervisor, create a VM, call it Win10. We can set it as a Gen 2 because it's the final image. Give it whatever memory you want to give it. Connect it to the network. Set the drive at its true size, whatever the drive size you want to set. And same thing again, we're going to boot from the light touch. Or you can boot from Pixie if you've set it up. Edit the settings, increase the processor. And then hit start. So that is how you create a Windows 10 reference image fully patched. I hope you found the video useful. Please leave me a comment if you've got any questions. Also like and subscribe to the channel. It all helps if you want to keep up to date with my latest uploads. I've also left a link in the description to some of the equipment that I've used to create this video. And until next time, see you later.